thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts. And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of this government before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. And only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today, we're pleased and honored to have a returning guest, Marc Hyden. He's the National Advocacy Coordinator with the Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty, a Project of EJUSA. He comes most recently from the National Rifle Association, where he served as a campaign field representative in the state of Florida. Marc makes a case to finally kill the death penalty, which I am in agreement with. Right? Please, during our broadcast, please do call in with your questions or comments, 646-652-4620, and press the 1 button so we know that you want to break in. That's 646-652-4620. Marc, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Thanks for having me back on, Joe.
Yeah, it's great. I want to diatribe just for a second, if you'll permit me. You know, the conservative group, you know, politically conservative, I should say, you know, those hardcore conservatives you see on television, you know, they typically invoke some sort of religious or spiritual tone to their voice. You know, they talk about, you know, God and whatever. And yet, the conservatives are the first ones to go to war, and they're the advocates of the death penalty. And you just think that there's absolutely no consistency there whatsoever. I mean, most religious people that I know of think, you know, 10 Commandments, for example, regardless of what religion. I mean, the 10 Commandments are sort of universal. How about thou shalt not kill? And just because the state is killing, it's okay. And that inconsistency just about drives me nuts. It doesn't make any sense. Now, if you were a non-conservative, you know, and that's fine. But being a conservative and then invoking religion in every speech, whenever you hear a conservative, it's always God bless America and all this. No, God's got to be really hacked off after he says God bless America and let's invoke the death penalty. You know, what say you?
Well, I mean, I am a conservative. I like to think that I'm a pretty principled guy. But when you're talking about inconsistencies and people who don't act on their principles consistently, that happens equally on the left, the right, and the center. It's just a part of human nature, unfortunately. But, you know, Joe, we've talked so many times about the death penalty and the conservative case against capital punishment that I think you could probably recite why I am opposed to it. But, you know, since we've last talked, I've been to Oklahoma, and I've spent a lot of time with Oklahoma conservatives, some Republicans, some libertarians, and they've told me how they feel about it. You know, like Marvin Goodman, a person who you probably know. He's a Republican county commissioner in the Oklahoma City area, and he's the chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus there. And he said, point blank, I do not trust the government to regulate shoelaces, let alone make life or death decisions.
Absolutely right.
So that goes to that distrust of government and our view of limited government. But it's not just at that level. It's also at the national level. People like Colonel Oliver North, whom I've come to know over the years, he told me firsthand that he thinks the death penalty is unnecessary and it's dangerous in the hands of our government. But then when you look how it doesn't coalesce with our principles of being pro-life and supporting fiscal responsibility, you see it just falls apart. But more and more conservatives are taking a stand and going back to their founding principles and opposing the death penalty.
Yep. You know, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball. Look, I'm on both sides of the screen. I know I'm that good looking that people can't get enough of me. That's why. Yeah, people are doing this, right? Okay. But what's the difference between invoking the death penalty in a court of law and the government deciding that certain groups that are 8,000 miles away pose a threat to the United States? We take our men and women, ship them over there, and tell them, by the way, when you see this guy or that group or this contingency, kill them. Is that not the death penalty in and of itself?
In a lot of ways, and this will be a little bit outside of my purview, but we've talked about war before. And Joe, I know that you're a person that supports a just war theory, and you think it should be the last possible option after diplomatic channels have failed, and it has to be absolutely necessary. I mean, you're a very smart individual, and I'm sure that's the kind of view that you espouse. And the difference, I think, is the death penalty is unnecessary in today's society because we have jails. And this is the Catholic view. It says if it's unnecessary, then we don't need to be in the business of killing people. And my assumption is that other conservatives, maybe some of the war hawks or even certain doves out there, would say that the difference is war is sometimes unavoidable. You should have the right to self-defense, and that's why in some cases war can be acceptable, but oftentimes that's not at all how it's operated. Meanwhile, the death penalty is wholly unnecessary because we have jails and we have ways of neutralizing these threats without executing lethal authority.
Yeah, but we have a double standard. We say here in the States that you're innocent until proven guilty, but yet a government official, usually the president or some high official, can say, we suspect that so-and-so in this country may be a terrorist responsible for fill in the blank. We send a drone in, take him out. We're not even sure if we take him out, but we do kill men, women, children, grandmothers, grandfathers, people in the neighborhood, and we leave. I mean, isn't that killing? Isn't that the death sentence?
It certainly is killing. I would have to agree with you there, and I know there's been instances of them droning the wrong people, and I think it was a few months ago a cavalcade following a wedding was hit. These were not combatants. They were not engaged in warfare against the United States or any of our allies. It was people coming back from a wedding. So that's very hard to justify, and I think if you implement a just war theory, actions like that clearly fail.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is, I'm steering a little bit away from the traditional talk of the death penalty, but as far as I'm concerned, whenever a public official decides that someone will die without a trial by jury, that's murder. And if you're not at war, and when I say at war, that means we're here minding our own business, and there are troops coming in, the port of New York, Baltimore, Florida, whatever, and we have to defend our country because we didn't do anything, they just want what we have, then you have a right to defend yourself. But that's never been the case. We're always going outside, and usually thousands of miles away, to find someone to kill. And what about the war in Iraq? Is that not killing people? They were no threat to us at all. In fact, that wasn't even a war. That was an invasion where, only 1.5 million people got killed. So we're not talking about a lot of people. So isn't that the death penalty for those people? And most of them, by the way, 500,000 were children.
Yeah, and that's terrifying. It's terrible, and it's repugnant. And yeah, I mean, if you want to go down to just the basics of it, there are people dying, and it's a penalty that they're being held to. So in that semantic view, yeah, it is a death penalty. Yeah. It's a little bit different than the one within our system of jurisprudence, right, which is completely fallible also. But yeah, innocent people get caught up in both war and the American judicial death penalty.
Okay, effective today, will you carry that banner as well?
Well, I carry that banner. I carry the banner that we should avoid unjust wars all the time anyway.
Okay, great. All right, we're on the same page. Well, all that bothers me because sometimes we just talk about the death penalty after someone is maybe misrepresented. They may have an attorney that's doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't have time to defend them. But of course, if you're wealthy enough, you'll never get the death penalty. If you're poor, there's a good chance, even if you're innocent, you'll get the death penalty. So we all know that. That's I don't think there's anyone who will disagree with that. But I wanted to look at the larger scope of this nation that we say we are a peaceful nation. We're a nation of peace. We're a nation of war, are we not?
I know a lot of people that would share that perspective, because oftentimes, if you look historically about how many years we've spent in peace, it's insignificant compared to the amount of wars or years that we spent during some sort of conflict.
Yeah. You can't say that for many European countries. They have been in wars, but they're not in constant conflict with everyone around the world. Even Germany today seems to be a peace-loving nation compared to the United States, and they've been involved, of course, in World War I, World War II, some hellacious wars where millions of people were killed, sometimes 25 to 50,000 in one day. Just from mowing people down. And yet, they are a relatively peaceful nation today compared to us. I don't know how we justify, I don't know how the President of the United States can get up there with a straight face and ever talk about the United States and use the word peace, understanding, all these other words of conciliation, all in one sentence, and not be fried. Just from the heavens, lightning doesn't come down and strike it or something. But all right, now tell us what's happening now that I've had my diatribe. I feel better. I'll probably sleep tonight. What's going on with the death penalty? Have we made in the past few months that since we've seen you? Have there been any progress made in that regard to the death penalty here in the United States?
Well, most states don't have their legislative sessions right now, so the action will start happening probably as early as January. But I can tell you that Delaware, their sentencing scheme when it comes to their death penalty was found to be unconstitutional because for many reasons they gave judges too much leeway, and they didn't require juries to even be unanimous in sentencing someone to die. So they found that to be unconstitutional. And the Attorney General said, we're not going to appeal that decision to the United States Supreme Court. And from what I understand from gathering a little bit of intelligence and talking to people that work in Delaware, the state legislature is not going to fix it either because they don't want a death penalty. So essentially, from my perspective, there is no more death penalty in Delaware. It's effectually repealed. So there's one step we have in the right direction in Delaware. But we have a couple other issues in other states, including Oklahoma, where you're at, that they're not necessarily good directions, but we're trying to fight the good fight. So last legislative session in Oklahoma, they passed a measure to put ballot or language on the ballot. It's called State Question 776. And what it does, it puts, if it's passed, it will put the death penalty in your Bill of Rights. I don't know how the death penalty is a right, unless it's a right to the government, but they're planning on putting it in the Bill of Rights of the Oklahoma Constitution. And what they do is they'll say unilaterally that the death penalty is unconstitutional, no matter if anyone says it is unconstitutional. Now, first of all, that circumvents the judiciary, and it aims to subvert our system of checks and balances. And I don't care if you're on the left, the right, the center, or something else. We can all agree that we probably like our Constitution. We don't want to see it violated, and that's why we have these press conferences calling on people to oppose this. And there was death row exonerees, Randy Steidle, Kwame Adjamu was there. Tina Kelly, who's the chair of the Libertarian Party in Oklahoma, spoke out. Marvin Goodman from the Republican Liberty Caucus, and many others. And they stated that many of them are pro-life from conception to natural death. So they oppose the death penalty, but they also oppose this because it trashes our Constitution. But if you look at the fine print, it also creates an avenue for much more expensive litigation. So some of the fiscal conservatives that spoke at these press conferences says this is a broken government program. Why are we trying to make it more expensive when Oklahoma is trying to dig out of this huge financial budgetary shortfall that they have right now?
Yeah. Well, do you think that the states actually impose a death penalty because it's less of a burden on the state? The guy comes in, he gets fried, buried, next. rather than placing someone in prison and then placing a burden on society. Is any logic there at all? I mean, I know it's logical to think that way, but I mean, if you're demented, but do they use that logic at all?
I've seen some interesting logic that's based on false premises used to support the death penalty, and I think that's what you're touching on. Probably what you hear from some of your pro-death penalty friends if you hang out with those sorts of folks. And what they'll say is that it saves money, but that's clearly not true. More than close to 24 studies have come out showing that the death penalty is much more expensive than life without parole. We're talking about the full life cycle of life without parole, including health care and everything else. And this is millions more dollars. And there was a study that just came out in it's not too far from you, Nebraska, where a very conservative economist who worked for a conservative think tank there did his own study. And he found that the death penalty in Nebraska costs millions of dollars more per year than just that of life without parole. So the burden is on society if you have the death penalty in place. If you get rid of it, you'll find that you'll have a surplus of money.
Yeah. Shouldn't we look at the death penalty in context with punishment, the type of punishment that's imposed upon certain crimes as a whole? For example, today our prisons are filled with young men, mostly young men, who may have been found in possession of marijuana, and they're given a light sentence, 2 to 5 years or something like that, and they're in jail, and they've really committed no crime. They're not harming anyone. They're of no harm to society, but yet they're spending time in jail. Shouldn't we revamp this whole system to say the only time that you go to jail is when you are a menace to society, that putting you out into society, you are most likely going to perpetrate some sort of crime or harm to people. And so the only people that we're going to incarcerate are those people who pose a real threat to society, not a perceived threat, but a real threat to society. Wouldn't our prisons empty out 75%? And then the 25%, I'm making that figure up, I have no idea what the number is, but then the small percent that are the hardcore criminals, those people we can afford to keep them in jail, we'll have much fewer people, and keep them in jail and keep them out of harm's way. The rest can be put into society, and they have to make reparations. Thank you. My tongue got stuck. Reparations, so that they can pay back to society rather than society constantly paying them for doing nothing and staying in jail.
Well, you touched on a lot of different points there, and if you're looking for equal justice in the criminal justice system, you're going to be looking for quite a while, because oftentimes it isn't there. But, I think you hit on a lot of points that people agree with. And there was a poll that just came out in Florida where I believe the majority of Floridians said now is the time for criminal justice reform. And I happen to agree. We incarcerate a lot of people for victimless crimes, and that gives them a felony on their record, prevents them from getting a good job when they get out. So oftentimes they feel like their only option is to return to crime. So it's a revolving door. And many of these people never perpetrated a crime against you or I or anybody else. Now, if you look at the way the criminal justice system in America was, over 100 years ago, these victimless crimes, not very many of them were punishable like this, and probably for good reason. But, there are different ways of looking at this. And, we've talked about restitution before. Bill O'Reilly, I'm sure you have very strong feelings one way or the other about him, but he opposes the death penalty, and he says that it's probably a much more just system to replace it with life without parole plus restitution, so these people that are housed can work to try to pay off the debts against society and against victims. And I think there's a lot of truth there. I mean, they can never repay their debts in full, but at least they can start the process.
Yeah, well, that restitution should hold true for everyone, whether or not you're in prison or not. But even more so if you're in prison, because then you have to maybe help pay for your room and board, if you will. Those people outside can continue to work, but part of their income must go towards restitution. So it just seems like we save a lot of money. It's a lot more humane. People get back in the mainstream. and you don't have this stigma that, I didn't pay this parking ticket and I was really past due and I didn't have the money, so I went to jail for 6 months, and forever you have that on your record, and now you can't find a job, and you find, well, the only way I can make any money is if I sell illegal drugs. I mean, it seems like we force people into crime. We force people into jobs that they don't want to do, and we make life miserable for everyone. And the group that pays the most is society.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think the DMV in Tulsa right now is probably going through your records to see if you have some unpaid parking tickets. So you probably opened up a can of worms there.
No, they repossessed my car, so I mean, I'm only kidding.
Well, yeah, but to go back to your point, but there's also another side of this, because there's a lot of people that are wrongly sentenced to die, which you and I know about, and it takes decades for them to clear their name and be released. And when they're released, how are they going to find work? On their resume, it'll say death row the past 25 years. It's really hard to introduce these people back into society, and we really don't help them get back. I think it was Glenn Ford in Louisiana. He was on death row for 33 years. He got stage 4 cancer, lung cancer, and at the time, that's when they found out that he was not guilty. So they released him, and they gave him a gift card, I think, for $15, and that was it. How was he supposed to put his life together?
Right.
Had he lived, how would he have gotten a job? I mean, this affects people, the guilty as well as the not guilty.
Yeah, and this happens in poor neighborhoods, especially minority neighborhoods, where there are fewer jobs, more people unemployed. Many get involved, I mean, on the fringes of maybe the drug culture or something, and they get caught because of their association. They get a prison sentence. They have a record. Now they guarantee they'd never find a job. We just seem to dig the hole deeper. We never seem to solve any problems in this country. We just make them worse.
It's a revolving door, and I completely agree with that. And something has to be done to stop the cycle. Even with violent crimes, there's something we can do to stop the cycle, perhaps to help victims, because many victims sometimes end up being perpetrators later in life, perhaps because they have this trauma that they've held on to in their brain that's led them to have different psychological problems. Perhaps if we treat the source of these problems, we can stop a lot of this violence. And I'm proud to say that our parent organization is Equal Justice USA, and they're kind of promoting this new paradigm of the criminal justice system, where they actually try to help victims and help prevent them from becoming perceived as criminals in the future, to try to stop crime and stop it at the source and stop it before it even becomes crime. And I think there's something that we should pay attention to with regards to that.
Yeah, especially when there's petty crime. I mean, stupid little things. People do stupid. I mean, I've never done anything stupid in my life. I want you to know
Naturally.
that. But we all do stupid things. You look back and you go, my God, what did I do that for? And it's not that you're a criminal or a bad person. You just might do stuff, but it didn't hurt anyone. But so many of these things that you do, if someone complained loud enough, you can wind up going, and then all of a sudden you have a record because you were picked up and maybe put in jail overnight or something, or for 2 days, and now you have a record, and that record follows you for the rest of your life. It just seems to be an absolutely insane system. Let me ask you, does Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and Gary Johnson, do all three of them, which ones support the death penalty?
Well, because of our tax status as a 501c3, I am prohibited from talking about anybody while they're running for office, especially the presidential election. But I think a very, very quick Google search will tell you about each of them. And to be honest, Joe, I think off the top of your head, you could probably answer that.
Okay. All right. Now, where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, it's about education. And, I was in Oklahoma recently. I spoke at the Republican Liberty Caucus, and I spoke at Liberty on Tap. And, I was telling people what this death penalty does in their state, how much it's costing, and showing them the faces of the people that have been wrongly convicted and sentenced to die, like Curtis McCarty. This is a man who was sentenced to die because of prosecutorial misconduct and because of a falsified statement by a disgraced forensic so-called expert, Joyce Gilchrist, who said that his hairs matched the hairs they found at the scene of the crime. And at first she said it didn't match. And then she went back and scribbled out her notes. And this is a woman who was fired for falsifying information, and this may have affected, hundreds of different cases, if not more. So we need to educate people on the fallibility of the death penalty. And we need to raise up voices, local voices in Oklahoma, and there's many. I know the Cotton County GOP chairman, the Logan County GOP chairman, they're both against the death penalty, and many others. So there's a nice group of people that are coalescing because they don't think this is pro-life. They don't trust the government. It's not fiscally responsible, and it doesn't even protect society or help murder victims' family members. This is a broken government program that doesn't really achieve any tangible benefit. So it's educate people and speak with your legislators.
But, I think some conservatives are just so disingenuous when they talk about abortion and then they talk about the death penalty. And their logic is totally inconsistent when they talk about those two side by side, which they never do, by the way. But if you see their positions, they take opposing positions. How many states now have abolished the death penalty?
Well, it depends. So Nebraska repealed the death penalty, but there's a referendum measure to try to bring it back, or to actually repeal of the death penalty. It's very confusing language. So that's kind of on hiatus. So there's 31 to 32 states that still have the death penalty, but it's always in flux because of these issues and holds from the Supreme Court. But most states don't actually use the death penalty. I think it was less than 10 that executed anyone last year, because they found out it's too expensive and it doesn't work, so why bother trying? Right. But to go back to your previous point about conservatives and consistency and with their pro-life views, I had a great conversation with a North Carolina GOP chairman, and he walked up to me and he goes, I support the death penalty. I think some guilty people deserve it. I'm pro-life, but guilty people deserve to die. And the problem there is that there's an assumption that only guilty people get hung up in the system. So I retorted to him, I was like, well, you may think some people deserve to die, but do you trust our government, the same government that couldn't launch a healthcare website, to do this efficiently and properly? And the light bulb went off, and he realized, well, if innocent people get caught up in this, how can I consider myself pro-life and still support it?
Right, yeah. Right. Now, do you see a day where there is a constitutional amendment abolishing the death penalty?
At the federal level?
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure the federal government or Congress could pass a happy birthday resolution right now. It's hard to get anything done in Washington. Now, Joe, me and you are 10th Amendment kind of guys. We believe that politics should be, or laws for the most part, if they're not mentioned in, powers are not mentioned in the Constitution, it should be left to the states. So my preference is to see states repeal it on their own, on a state-by-state legislative basis. Would there ever be a federal amendment to the Constitution against the death penalty? I don't know. If it would happen, it'd be a tough row to hoe, and that would not be my preference, because I think that respect and deference should be shown to the states.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, well, we're just about approaching that witching hour. We'd like to leave the last couple of minutes for you to wrap things up.
Sure. Well, I appreciate this opportunity. Always love hanging out with you, Joe. And next time in Oklahoma, we're going to have to go grab a steak at Cattleman's Steakhouse if you're willing to come down to Oklahoma City.
Absolutely.
Okay. It's on me.
Okay.
But I hope your viewers and your listeners, if they want to know more, go to conservativesconcern.org. You'll find all the information you want there. You can also sign up to our monthly newsletter so you can stay up to date, find out where I'm speaking, when I'm doing a show with Joe Cristiano, the GQ radio show. And if they want to send me a message, ask me any questions, send it to info@conservativesconcern.org.
Yeah, and if you ever need anyone to interview, I'm always available, okay?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you very much for being our guest. Thank you. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, but let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Joe.